everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and right now I'm going to count down my top 20 favorite movies of all time. This was a really difficult list to put together. I'm still not totally sure if I'm even completely satisfied with it, but I'm going to share with you what I have. I'm going to do some runner-ups, and this is, of course, not a list of the films that I think are the most important movies of all time, or even necessarily the greatest films of all time, the most artistic, the most thought-provoking, the most intelligent films, movie canon, necessarily. There are some movies that you might think are like that are on this list, but this is completely subjective, entirely just movies that have influenced me, that I go back to a lot, that I think about a lot, that have shaped me, and that I can't stop thinking about. And there are a couple of more recent things on this list, but for the most part, this is stuff that goes all the way back to my childhood. And I am known as kind of a mainstream guy, and that will certainly be reflected a lot on this list. There's not a lot of really super deep pull, deep cut stuff on this list. A lot of the majority of this will be things that you've heard of. A lot of this, if you know me, you won't be real surprised by. I continue to branch out and try a lot of different things. I've watched a lot of new movies that I've turned out, that I have influenced me, that I've ended up really loving, and that I've even gone back to once or twice on He Made Me Watch, stuff that Eric's had me watch over the last 3 years now, that he's been living here. And there's, I don't think any of those movies made this list, but there were a couple that might have been contenders. But there's at least one movie here that's one of Eric's favorite movies that I would not have put on this list 5 years ago, that, or 6 or 7. I forget when I reviewed it. It is a movie that I've reviewed before, that I would not have put on this list until I reviewed it. That is another thing that you'll notice if you've watched very much Superhero Rewind, or you've watched other videos on the channel. There's stuff here that I have reviewed before in some capacity or another, and one or two that I'm planning on doing down the line in the not too distant future. So anyway, I want to say thanks a ton to everybody who made this extra video possible. This is a thing that we're doing because we reached a goal last week on the Captain Logan show. I left it up to the viewers to decide what ranked list I was gonna make, and the majority of the Super Chats that day came from Azim. So special thanks especially to Azim, but of course to everybody that left a Super Chat that day. That's the reason that I'm doing this particular video. And Azim, in particular, again, helped us jump over the hurdle, and left some ideas for for this video, and I decided to go ahead and let him pick, partly because he helped us get over the hump, but also because I thought he had the best ideas. So thanks again to Azim, and Azim's idea was my favorite movies. It was going to be a top 10 list until I realized that that was a really, really difficult thing to do, and there are some categories that I didn't hit that I'll do a runner-up for at the end, like Western and documentary and things like that. Just stuff that I'm not as big of a fan of as I am other genres. So I didn't think it would be very reflective of my sensibilities and my favorite things if I only allowed one science fiction film on this list, for instance, because science fiction is where I live. So let's go ahead and get started. My number 20 is Misery, which again may not be a big surprise to a lot of people. That is my favorite horror movie, and a Stephen King book that I've stayed away from because I've been told that it is a lot better than the movie. Of course, that's often the case, and that there's more complex characterization and stuff. Well, I say I've avoided it. I actually started reading it now that I'm thinking about it a couple of years ago, and I just haven't gotten back to it. But I've always been a little bit leery of that because I don't want it to ruin the movie for me. I love that film. I think it's a wonderfully tense movie, but I think there's also a really nice sense of humor to that film. It resonates with me a little bit as a writer. Certainly I'm not like a famous person or whatever, but just the idea of, you know, when you're younger, you have and you're writing or you're acting or whatever it is, you might have the ambition to try to be like a megastar, and this is the negative side to that. This is what could be really scary about being a megastar, and it's about people's obsession with famous people, and it's about how much of art is owned by the artist and how much of that art is owned by the person who consumes it, and kind of, I don't know, toxic fandom, which is, I guess, kind of like a negative buzzword now, but it was the first thing that came to my mind. It is kind of about that. It's kind of about toxic fandom. And anyway, it's wonderfully well acted, it's wonderfully well shot, and it's one of the first... it's one of the first horror films that I remember seeing and wanting to watch again, despite the things that made me cringe and that creeped me out. And there's also a wonderful sheriff in that movie who brings some nice humor and humanity to the film. But anyway, so that I did want to represent some horror on this list, something from the horror genre on this list, because I've been getting more into horror the last few years. I still don't think of myself as a horror fan, but I'm more indoctrinated into that world now. I like things like Cabin in the Woods, and I've done some more reviews of those kinds of films since I've been, or in the last few years, and I've gotten more into that genre since I started doing Geekvolution. And so I partly wanted to put that movie on this list because I'm surprised that of all the other horror films that I've seen now, that is still the one that most stands out to me, that I still really love. My number 19 is The Lion King, which I'm kind of surprised, honestly, ended up making this list, because I don't think of myself as a giant Lion King fan, but when I started thinking about the Disney catalog, and if I picked a Disney animated movie, because of course I grew up on those and they were a big part of my viewing experience as a kid, it was hard not to put one on the list. And I was like, I almost left them all off because I was like, well, it's kind of arbitrary. Like, Aladdin is a movie I like a lot, Little Mermaid I watched a whole lot. Like, which one would I pick? And I started thinking about the new Lion King, and the fact that I have no intention whatsoever of seeing that film, and why. And I started realizing that that movie is more important to me than I realized. It's not perfect. I've got third act issues with it. Movie story-wise, I think the end of that movie is a little bit rushed. But it is just on a, if nothing else, on a technical animation level, it's an absolute marvel. And it's... like, I already loved animation, but I think that really cemented my love for animation. One of my memories in a movie theater that is just like burned into my mind is the way the logo hits when that movie starts. And like, I guess we've done this a lot since then, but that was a thing I'd never seen before, where it just like hits the black screen and then like the music pounds and the music lays out, and there was just something about that hit me really hard, and it was one of the best cinematic experiences I think I had as a kid. It was really special to me, and I also think that the message of that in that movie for kids is a good one. Responsibility, heavy is the head that wears the crown, how difficult being a leader is, and that getting to be in charge is not always all that it's cracked up to be. It can be a noble endeavor and a very important endeavor, but it's not just, I get to tell people what to do, nobody can tell me what to do. It's difficult, and it's not a thing that everybody's cut out for. And and then of course the circle of life thing being that you can't always control what your lot in life is, and you just do the best you can, but like not everybody is going to be able to do everything, and sometimes you're going to be thrust into a position that you don't want to do, and maybe you'll discover that you're cut out for it, and maybe you won't. But I think there are some good life lessons there, and there's certainly some debate to be had about what exactly the movie is saying with Circle of Life and all of that, but that stuff resonated with me when I was a kid, and so yeah, I'm kind of surprised that's making my list. My number 18, this was tough, is The Truman Show. I almost put The Mask here. Some Jim Carrey movie had to make this list. Jim Carrey was a big deal for me when I was a kid. I think his films kind of shaped my comedic sensibilities to a great degree. You know, I always talk about They Might Be Giants. I always talk about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Weird Al Yankovic. I think Jim Carrey is maybe the fourth big thing, and predates a lot of that stuff. But like in my more formative years, those three things were the trifecta. And then before that, you had Jim Carrey and just the kind of over-the-top, zany, in-your-face, nutso comedy. You notice I talk with my hands a lot. You notice I'm pretty boisterous. I've got a lot of energy that I feel like I have to reel in sometimes. I either had that in common already a lot with Jim Carrey, or he kind of helped to bring that out in me when I was watching Jim Carrey movies when I was a kid. 1994 was a big year. The Mask came out, and before that, you had Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, which I loved. I have recently gone back and watched that movie again. It doesn't hold up great, but better than I thought it would. I get why I loved that movie when I was like 9, 10. But anyway, I went ahead and put The Truman Show on this list because I think it's one of his best performances, and it's a really thought-provoking movie. It's another treatise, commentary on what art is, and particularly talking about what is okay and not okay to do for the sake of art. It kind of is a commentary on reality television before that had even really taken a hold, but it was about television on the whole and trying to create this like wholesome world and this gimmick where people fall in love with this real person that they watch religiously like they would a fictional person. And what's supposed to be, interesting about it is that it is actually happening. It is a real person. You can see 24 hours a day what's going on with this guy. And interesting that it's played as exaggerated as it is because it doesn't feel as far-fetched today as it did back then, honestly, especially with YouTube culture and stuff. I think The Truman Show maybe even holds up better now than it did back then. That movie, in a way, was almost predictive. It's really exaggerated, it's satirical, and it's just not that far-fetched, especially at this point. But I really like what it has to say about what television has kind of done to the culture, and this blurred line between reality and fiction, and the notion that maybe anything is okay, or you can convince people that anything is okay if it creates a viable product, or if it creates an artistic product. I love the guy who creates that television world, that kind of like perfect reflection of the 1950s. It is a really interesting, kind of deep character who we don't learn a whole ton about, but there's so much going on in his head. That guy, I really like the scenes where he seems to be able to justify anything he's doing with the art that he's creating, and he's almost at odds with himself, where like it's about the commercial return. He's able to do it because it's making money, but the real reason he wants to do it is this experiment, and is like creating this tapestry with a real person who doesn't realize that he is in a fictional reality. And it's wonderful. It's brilliant. I think it's one of Jim Carrey's best roles. I actually still I still put Man on the Moon above it, but Man on the Moon didn't make this list, partly because I didn't really want to put two Jim Carrey movies on the list, but also I think that it's one of my favorite biopics, but it's not one of my favorite movies, even though I think that it is maybe technically a bigger achievement than The Truman Show. But The Truman Show is a movie that I can go back to over and over and over again, and that I get more out of and see more things in every time. And it's a really entertaining film. It's one of those movies where Jim Carrey gets to do some really fun comedic things, and he's being used for what he got famous for, but it's also a really good dramatic film, and he's and it's really entertaining, but it's also really thought-provoking. My number 17 is Groundhog Day, which is one of my favorite comedies of all time. And I will say, there are a couple of Bill Murray movies on this list that I was not able to help. But Groundhog Day, surprisingly, is a movie that I don't get tired of and that I can keep going back to, which is an achievement in and of itself, given that the whole movie is about a causality loop, and you see the same scenes with a lot of different variations, of course, throughout the movie, and you kind of get tired of them in the same way that Bill Murray does, and that's where part of the comedy comes from. But I still don't get tired of going back and seeing it. Eric told me a story about a friend that he had who tried to watch this movie every day was it for a year, for a month or something, and he got like, I don't know, 20-something days in, and it was driving him insane. So, like, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do the thing I did with 89, where I would, like, watch this movie a whole bunch of times and do a commentary on it. I should do a commentary on Groundhog Day at some point. But it is a surprisingly rewatchable movie. It's a real, pardon me, it's a real heartwarming movie. Bill Murray has a wonderful character arc. It's I think some later Jim Carrey movies kind of looked at this as a model, and it kind of became a formula, but I don't know that this formula was there too much before it, where you have a guy who is kind of a jerk face and goes through some kind of strange conceit where there is a supernatural component that's not explained, and it's kind of the universe testing him, and in being tested by the universe, he, by the end, kind of finds himself and discovers his heart, and it's sort of like, you know, Tony Stark without the suit and with a more absurd conceit. So Liar Liar is like this, Bruce Almighty is like this, and this is kind of the original of those, and I don't know, I think it's a brilliant movie. It made the AFI's top 10 comedies of all time, which I was surprised by when I first saw that list, because I hadn't seen it in a long time. And I remember watching this once or twice when I was a kid, and I remember people just complaining about having to watch the same scenes over and over again. I didn't remember this as, like, I remembered the premise being kind of funny, but I thought maybe it kind of, you know, wears off, and it becomes just the like the only thing that is fun about it is that initial premise, and it's the novelty of that, and it's not that way at all. The way it plays with butterfly effect, I also really, really like. I'm talking about that all the time with time travel stuff, and it is surprisingly one of the smarter movies about that, where whenever Bill Murray's character will change something, it feels real logical and believable how the world changes after that. And I also really like what it has to, and then of course the next day it gets reset. And I also really like what it has to say about, or at least how it deals with relationships and how it deals with people's perceptions of other people. And like, Bill Murray really likes this girl, but at first it's just it's just kind of this superficial obsession, and then he starts to fall in love with her, and he's spent countless hours with her, but she is reset the same every day and doesn't really like him that much and hasn't gone through all the experiences that he has. And I really like that as the movie progresses, he starts to see her as a person and not an object. But he's still, like, so desperate to have her that he'll do anything he can to get that, and to get her, and he's not a character who changes like a light switch. He's incrementally learning as he goes along, and I like the idea that he needs the billion hours that he spends in that day in order to change. If all of this happened in just one day, he wouldn't have learned anything. And it is a deeper and smarter film than I ever gave it credit for until I went back to it a few years ago, and I've seen it now several times since then. My next movie is the original Planet of the Apes. What can you say about Planet of the Apes? This is a movie I avoided when I was growing up because I knew the ending. It was impossible to live in American culture and not have that ending spoiled for you. Really impressive, and oh wow, honestly, I maybe should have put this movie on this list. I just thought of it. Fight Club is not on here, but I love Fight Club, and that was a movie that I was surprised I managed to get away with not knowing the ending of before I finally got around to watching it and reviewing it. And Planet of the Apes, I did not get away with that. There are so many parodies of the ending of that. You know, you see the Statue of Liberty uh, and you know, Damn Dirty Apes, just over and over and over again. Especially when I was growing up in the late '80s, early '90s, and you know, it was everywhere. And so I knew how the movie ended. And one of the brilliant things, besides all of the really thoughtful commentary on human condition, and I mean it's a classic deep science fiction film. But besides what it has to say about the human condition and about the way we treat each other and the kind of cycle of enlightenment and self destruction. The most impressive thing for me about that movie is that I knew how it ended, and it didn't matter. It still hit me, I feel like, about the same way it would have otherwise, because it's so layered. Like, I didn't know what exactly it meant. Like, I knew what happened, I knew the bare bones of the story, but actually experiencing it, when you get to that place at the end, and Charlton Heston finds out that he's actually on Earth, and that this is not some other counter Earth or some other alien world, and that like we did this to ourselves. It's so poignant. It hit me so hard. It's wonderful. The sequel is the most depressing, wrist-slitting thing I've ever seen, ever. And I also really like it for what it is. But yeah, the original Planet of the Apes is genius. The new movies I also like a lot, and got into this because I saw the first movie in the remake series and was kind of impressed with it, and really wanted to see the sequel, but really didn't want to go to the sequel as it was getting closer to Planet of the Apes without seeing the original. And then I watched Planet of the Apes and I was like, I'm an idiot. I don't know why I didn't grow up with this. This should have been one of my formative movies. Like, I don't know how I became as big of a science fiction fan as I did without Planet of the Apes. It's not, and again, I didn't put movies on this list just because they're important, but it's important for a reason. It's also just a brilliant, like, big budget Twilight Zone episode. I love how much it feels like a Twilight Zone episode from start to finish. And anyway, it's wonderful. My next movie is also a great satirical science fiction film. It's Dark City, and this is a movie that I've not spent a lot of time with. I've only seen it a couple of times, but I liked it enough to put it on this list. Alex Proyas, I think, is a directing genius. I wish he did more. I wish he had gotten more work. He also made The Crow, and I kicked around The Crow. I like that movie a lot, but not as much as Dark City. It is another, what makes a man film. It's or more what it is about humanity that makes us human. What is that spark? What is the thing that separates us from the animals? And what do we do with that knowledge? It is a really stylistic film. It's one of the few movies that most actually looks like a comic book, and it is very comic book derived, but it's not a comic book movie. It's not really thought of that way, and I love the kind of mix match of different time periods in that movie. That movie is the reason that I know what an automat is. It is I guess I really am drawn to these kinds of reality versus, or these kind of these surreality movies, these what is real and what is not, and the ways in which that can be kind of subjective to people, because if you really care about the world you're in and the people that you're around, and they become real to you, how important is it that you actually see them as real? This movie isn't about that as much as The Matrix is, but I guess movies like that I end up being really drawn to for whatever reason. And this is a movie that is not concerned with realism, and then you find out that there's a reason for that it all ends up being totally believable, and you can suspend your disbelief. But I like the ways in which we're in the dark through so much of it, where I'm just like, I don't even know what's going on. I don't know what this world is. It feels kind of like, and I think it got to be influenced by this a lot. It feels like the original Metropolis in a lot of ways, 1927, where as I'm watching it, I'm assuming that everything means something, and it does, but it's not just a symbolic movie. Like, ultimately, when you find out what the aliens are doing and why and where we really are, which is a brilliant reveal, it's just wonderful, and it looks fantastic, it's breathtaking, and this was not a real expensive film, and it looks great. When you get to that place, you're like, oh, cool, it all comes together, and it's tight, and it makes sense, and my mind is blown, and I love that feeling. Of course, I had that with Fight Club too. I really should have put that movie on this list, but with Dark City, the whole time I'm assuming that it's all surreal, and that it's just like crazy, almost German expressionism, like Metropolis was, and then it turns out that it isn't that, and it's just brilliant. But anyway, so yeah, I could not help but putting Dark City on this list. And if you've never seen it, I imagine that's the movie that the fewest people who watch this video will have seen. Go check that out. And hopefully I didn't give too much away with it. But anyway, my next movie is The Founder, which I think is the most recent movie on this list. And being as recent as it is, you might think that it hasn't been around long enough for me to put it on my favorite movies list, because most of these are movies that I go back to over and over again. Dark City I really should sit down and watch again, but it just really stuck with me and is burned in my brain. The Founder is my absolute favorite biopic at this point. I think it is the crowning performance of Michael Keaton's career. Birdman is up there. Maybe they're together. I mean, they're both wonderful. But The Founder resonated with me a lot personally. I grew up in the restaurant business. My dad managed steakhouses, and this was a history that I knew a little bit about but wasn't super familiar with, so it was interesting to learn a lot about it, and the movie gets a lot of things right. I've looked into it since then, and obviously biopics are not the way to learn about history, but they are a good place to get interested in the history, and then you enjoy it as a story, and then you go find out what really happened. But I just think that Ray Kroc is such a complex, real person and such a complicated character in that film, where he is sympathetic, but he's kind of a tragic protagonist, despite the fact that he gets everything he wants by the end. It's sort of like a selling your soul kind of story. Like, he gets everything he wants, but at what cost? And he almost sells his humanity in a way in order to take over McDonald's, because of course he didn't actually create it. And I love the title of the film, by the way, because he is not the founder, but he is the founder too. McDonald's wouldn't be what it is, and wouldn't be the giant mega franchise where you have the stores in almost every country in the world, if it weren't for Ray Kroc. But he had to screw the original founders in order to make it what it is. And it has a lot to say about how, just naturally, just by telling the story, about loopholes in business, and about like might makes right, and kind of and like whether it's okay to do a thing just because you can get away with it, like if it is legal, or you can get around the legalities, and is it more important to be ethical, or is it more important, to stick to principles, or is it more important to be successful? Because this is a guy that kept trying everything he could to get rich quick and to make something of himself, and was never able to do that. And there's this whole motif in the film about persistence, and about how you can do anything you set your mind to, as long as you have confidence and you fight for it and you're persistent. And Ray Kroc kind of develops this philosophy where, as long as it justifies the means. As long as he's getting what he wants out of it, it doesn't matter how many little people he has to step on in order to get there. And that is the story of, unfortunately, so much big business in the country. And I really liked, not throwing him under the bus to where he's just like a complete villain. The movie's not anti-business, but it is, and it also doesn't tell you how to think about it either. It just lays all the cards on the table, and at the end of the day, it's just kind of objectively, he had to screw people in order to get where he got, and it's up to you to decide whether or not people should act that way, and certainly I don't think they should, but I also understand how he got where he got and why he felt like he had to do that, and how he was kind of corrupted by power. It's also just a really well-made movie. It's really entertaining, and impressive that I'm not depressed walking out. Like, it's weird. It's not a feel-good movie, but it makes me feel good, if that makes any sense. I think I've sat down and watched it 5 or 6 times now, and I'm busy. I'm usually making videos. I'm usually preparing for videos. I don't sit down and watch a lot of movies that aren't for work anymore. And The Founder I put on in the background a lot. Okay, my next movie is Empire Strikes Back. I'm not a giant Star Wars fan, as a lot of people know, but I think Empire is just brilliant, and for me, nigh perfect. I love that movie. I have done a review of it. I've done a rewind. I guess it's a science fiction rewind, but it was before we had that banner for it. And I guess Star Wars isn't, in my mind, really science fiction, but you get the point. I have done a rewind on that movie, and you can see my more in-depth thoughts on it there. But that movie is here almost purely for atmosphere. I just love how I feel when I'm watching that movie. And it's not just, oh, look, this kind of lighter big sci-fi romp got dark and gritty. It's not because, oh yay, scary, or oh yay, somebody got his arm cut off, or even the big giant plot twist at the end, because that's another thing where I would have known that before I came into this movie. I saw the Star Wars movies relatively late as a child. I don't think I was 8 or 9 until I was seeing those movies. And it's, like I said, it's all atmosphere. I like the constant, I will say I like the constant foreboding sense of danger in that movie, certainly. And it's set dressing. It's the contrast of locales. And I'm selling the movie short because it's a brilliant script, and there's a lot of really interesting thematic stuff going on, and there's a really good kind of, existential question and ethical conundrum about whether it's impulsive to go try to save your friends when you know they're in danger, but when you also know that you're not actually prepared to do that yet, where you have work to do to really be able to help them. And there's a really good motif about temptation in that movie. So there's a lot of stuff to unpack, idea-wise and thematically in that movie, and about responsibility and about growing up and stuff. But it's, like I said, just for me, I just like sitting down and watching that movie because of a contrast of locales, where you go from the snow, which is bright and white but bleak, and then you go to Dagobah, which is dirty and grimy, but where the hope is. And then you go to the Cloud City, which is serene and beautiful and peaceful, and then it's where the most horrific things in the movie happen. It's brilliant. I love it. It's the one I go back to most often. My next movie is RoboCop. This is the film that 7 or 8 years ago, I would never have thought to put on this list, and then I did a rewind on it, and this is such an interesting experience for me. And I don't mean to put a movie on my favorites list just because I had fun reviewing it, but that is the place where it starts for me, and I have since gone back and watched RoboCop 2 or 3 times, and I get more out of it every time I see it. Again, it's a wonderful science fiction film. What makes a man a man? It's satirical. It's really over the top and violent and gritty, and it seems like it's just relishing that. It's just reveling in that until you realize that it is a satire, and that it's about a world where people have forgotten what it means to be human, and they've forgotten how to care about each other, and It's about the urban upheaval of the 80s and how close it felt like we were coming to becoming a police state. And I like the ambiguity of that movie being maybe in the future or maybe just being an alternate version of the 80s. It's got a lot in common with The Crow. I think there's actually similar directors. I never really thought about this before with Proyas and Verhoeven. But anyway, so I remembered RoboCop just being really violent, and I thought it was gratuitous violence. And then I sat down and watched it again, and it wasn't until like 5 minutes after I saw it that I was thinking, oh, this is a satire. Like, there's stuff going on here. And I already appreciated it more than I had as a kid because, and I had seen bits and pieces of it as a kid, but I never really sat down and watched it. But I already appreciated it more because I was impressed with how much I cared about Alex Murphy and how much he came alive while he's an absolute robot. And this really cool juxtaposition where all of the humans, with all of their expression and their emotion, feel less human than this guy who seems to have had his humanity ripped away from him. That's just absolutely brilliant. But I still didn't care about it as much as I do right now, and I sat down and I did a commentary with Eric, and don't go back and listen to that commentary because it's terrible, because I did not get this movie as I made that commentary, and it wasn't until I sat down and wrote The Rewind, which is a 45-minute video, that I started to really appreciate it and get it and see RoboCop as a superhero and realize how much of it is not just about what makes a man, but what makes a hero, and the self-sacrifice of it and the willingness to hold to your principles and go against the status quo, and how the law is not synonymous with morality. And it's also, again, just deeply entertaining and very funny, but cringe funny, where I'm like, oh, if you really stop and think about it, this is messed up, and I shouldn't actually be laughing at this. Love RoboCop. It's turned into one of my favorite films. Next up is Who Framed Roger Rabbit, another movie that I have done a rewind on, so I won't talk too much about story-wise, except to say that, as I said in that video, it is, for me, textbook about how to do a character arc, about opportunity for change and seeing a character who has that moment where he decides that he's going to go a different way, and then see how it changes him, but not turns him into just conveniently a completely different, perfect person by the end of the movie. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is great because it shouldn't work. On paper, everything about it sounds anachronistic and messed up and wrong, and it should not work, but it does. And a lot of my favorite movies that are on this list have that to some degree. So Who Framed Roger Rabbit, like, if you pitch I don't know how this even gets off the ground, right? Like, pitch this movie. It's gonna be about real life cartoons that we're gonna actually draw and have be on screen with real life people, which in the middle of the 80s, 1980, whatever, I don't know how we can even be sure that we can make this work, and they didn't either. We're gonna have cartoons in a world where they're actually real, where I guess they are drawn, but they are sentient life forms that we don't just draw in movies and cartoons. We cast them, and they live in their own world, they live in their own town right next to Hollywood that's called Toontown, and it's going to be set in the early days of animation, and we're going to make it a noir, and we're going to make it a detective piece, and we're going to make the protagonist not the cartoon rabbit, but Eddie Valiant, who is a private detective who is retired and doesn't want to do the job anymore because his brother got killed by a toon. Like, everything about that ends up being brilliant, but it should not work, and that's why I love it. It's a wonderful... It's a wonderful snapshot in time, because it feels like a thing that could never happen again. I talk about this all the time with finally putting Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse on screen together, unless, of course, Disney gets so big they eventually buy Warner Brothers, which is possible. I mean, they are ruling the world now. But barring that, does not feel like a thing that could happen again. Like I said, it's a wonderful snapshot in time. It's a period piece but is also a reflection of some stuff that was going on in the 80s and how we felt about entertainment. But at the same time, it impressively holds up and is timeless, and I don't think will ever be hard to go back to. And, maybe you have to have a little bit of an appreciation of animation to really sit down and watch that movie. But by and large, I think 100 years from now, people are still going to be watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit. My next movie is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, another film that holds up brilliantly, that I don't think will ever age poorly. Thematically, I love Willy Wonka for what it has to say about public education and about parenting and about common sense. It is a great treatise and satire, a lot of satirical films on this, about those things. These are mostly horrible, monstrous parents that the movie doesn't come out and say are. Well, it does with the Oompa Loompa songs, certainly. But, I think they're sort of supposed to be kind of endearing by the end. It's a whole bunch of, idiot people that we're not supposed to hate, but if you really start to think about it, they're kind of all morons. And Willy Wonka is this really out there, over-the-top, exaggerated, melodramatic, or I guess I should just say dramatic, personality, but he understands children, and he sees all the corruption in the world, and that's why he, set himself apart and closed off his factory to the public. And, what that movie has to say about childhood and about why it's important to hang on to certain things about being a child, it's wonderful. And it's one of the most entertaining films ever made. I think it is Gene Wilder's crowning achievement. I've seen him in other things. I've liked him in other stuff. But that's what I think most people really remember him for. And I don't think he had a problem with that. I think he loved that movie as much as the rest of us. He makes some really bold choices. He takes some wild risks that all pay off in that movie. And it's also my favorite musical. I like every song in that except for Cheer Up Charlie, which I always want to skip. But it's great. And also, who doesn't love candy? And who doesn't love a whole movie about candy? And it's one of the most quotable films ever made as well. It's very difficult not to watch that. And then later find some reason to yell, "You get nothing!" Which I do quite frequently. Next movie is Ghostbusters. How could Ghostbusters not be on this list at the risk of multiple Bill Murray movies? He's just that good. He's just that funny. But Ghostbusters doesn't get on the list just because of Bill Murray, of course. It's foundational. It's a movie that I can't imagine the world without. It created what feels like brand new archetypes, what feels like almost a brand new genre, and it was just making the old new again. It was just taking things that feel anachronistic that you'd never think to put together and sandwiching them together and then making a thing that is timeless and that feels like it always should have been there. So you take the horror trend that had been going on through the 80s and you mix that with a comedy about business and just kind of, slackers trying to find their way in the world. And it is not it's not a horror film, and it's not a comedy. It is a comedy, but it takes these horror elements and they, within the context of the movie, are scary enough, but it's not what it looks like on the surface. That movie was sold so hard to kids, especially later with the cartoon show, where you think of it almost like a superhero thing, where it's you've got all these gadgets, and you've got your bad guys, and you fire things at them, and you have a cool car, and you have all the trappings of Adam West Batman, right? But at the end of the day, it's not a story about heroes. They're almost anti-heroes. It's just a story about some guys trying to make a buck who accidentally almost destroy the world and have to clean up their own mess, and then they're heralded heroes at the end. it's a truly spectacular film. It's almost perfect. I don't know what I would change about Ghostbusters, and it's one of those movies that was impressive at the time because it kind of works as a family film, but it's pushing envelopes and it's like seeing what you can get away with by being a movie that you can still kind of take your kids to. It's not really a kids movie, and again, some of my favorite movies that are on this list are like that. But yeah, and again, a lot of it is just aesthetics and atmosphere. It's got a great soundtrack. That's part of what dates it, but then movies like this, you can almost go back later and look at like a period piece, right? Where it's like, well, it is set in the 80s, you know? Like, you say, oh, this music dates it so much, but, well, it's set in the time that it's set, so it should have that. Yeah, I mean, I think Ghostbusters is absolutely timeless, and I think the comedy holds up, and again, one of the most quotable movies of all time. But it also kind of scratches that superhero itch in a way, and you have to keep reminding yourself they're not really superheroes. They're really just out for themselves. And it's also really impressive to have a character like Venkman, who is, for all intents and purposes, not a good person, not a hero, not somebody that we should hold up on a pedestal. And yet there's something really endearing about him. There's something about that guy that I think a lot of us can relate to. And, like, he's a womanizer and he's a scoundrel, and you should hate that guy, but you don't. And that's one of the really impressive things about it. And is a movie that I go back to constantly. My number 7 is Rocky, the original Rocky film. I enjoy the whole franchise to varying degrees. There's not one that I just can't sit down and watch. I'll sometimes skip 5, but I like it as a series. And I will also go on record to say that Creed and Creed 2 are almost on par, if not straight up on par, with the original Rocky, both of them. I think Creed and Creed 2 are equally great films, and I don't think there is a movie in the Rocky series that ever quite gets back to the quality of characterization, especially in that first film. But those two movies get close, so if I could, I would just put all 3 of those movies in this spot, but I am going to put the original Rocky over Creed and say that it's one of my top 20 favorite movies. What an impressive film in every aspect. It's the consummate underdog story. It's on multiple levels. Like, the movie itself is an underdog story, and it's about a wonderful underdog story. It's one of my favorite character studies on film, and it does the thing that most impresses me, which is it wins me over on a thing I didn't think I would care about. I didn't grow up with Rocky. I never thought to watch it. I didn't bother with it. I saw all the parodies of it in The Simpsons and various places. It was constantly being talked about and made fun of because it had so many sequels. You heard Adrian, and like that's in the Ninja Turtles movie. I never knew what was going on there. I just knew that it was a Rocky reference. I never thought to watch it because I didn't care about boxing. And because I didn't care about, like, macho fighting stuff, and Sylvester Stallone had been just okay in other things I'd seen him in. Like, I liked Demolition Man. I didn't watch Rocky because I liked Demolition Man, and like, Judge Dredd was weird and not great. And, like, when I was a kid, I saw some Sly Stallone movies, but I didn't love him as an actor. And then I saw Rocky, and I was like, oh, finally, because my wife loves that series, and after Rocky Balboa came out, we ended up watching every movie of that series in a week. Every night we watched one, and that's one of my favorite movie watching experiences now with my wife. It was great, and that movie just hit me in a place and kind of changed my everything a little bit, as far as my appreciation for film, because I was like, again, didn't care about boxing, and suddenly I'm so invested in that fight at the end and really cared about what was going on because I wanted this guy to succeed so much. And everybody can see something of themselves in Rocky. It's just, of course, wonderful and brilliant. And again, not on this list because it's important, not on this list because it won an Oscar, but it is important and won an Oscar because it was deserving of that. And, sometimes there's a reason that things get as popular as they are. Stallone's a genius. It's so impressive that he wrote and directed and starred in that movie, and crazy that, and a lot of the sequels, and crazy that it managed to even get made. Like I said, in and of itself, if you've never listened to Sly Stallone talk about that, go listen to an interview where he talks about it in a lot of different places. Where he talks about how he was kind of a nobody and it was hard to get that movie off the ground, and he wanted it so bad he made it happen, which is exactly what that movie's about. Just wonderful, and I think weirdly a great family movie. Like, it's got some grit and there's some blood and there's there's some gang stuff, and I mean, like, it doesn't look like a wholesome, of course, G-rated family film, but Rocky is such a great role model. He's a character that kids should aspire to, and what's great about that character is he's so wise and doesn't realize it. He's got he's making mistakes and he's messing up, and he's got a lot to learn himself, but he's also got so much street smarts, and he's had so much experience, and he's got this kind of innate sense of common sense that he's able to inspire people and teach people something about their own lives and how to not make the same mistakes he did from the very beginning, even as young as he is in that first movie, and even with as much as he has to learn. The way he gets Adrian out of her shell, the things that he has to say to little Marie toward the beginning of the movie. He admits that he's not even sure that he should be giving advice to anybody, considering his lot in life and the fact that he's beaten up people on the docks for money. But the guy does have some kind of innate wisdom, and it's about how intelligence and brilliance don't necessarily make a person great, or you don't have to have that to be a great person. Rocky is just inherently a good man and cares about people and wants to do the right thing and has his heart in the right place. And a lot of the comedy comes from his ignorance and his lack of education, but I don't feel like we're ever making fun of him for that, and it's very endearing because the movie is saying, like, you can achieve great things even if you don't have as much as your neighbor, even if you're not able to get a great education or whatever it is, or even if you weren't born with a great IQ naturally. And I think that's a really important lesson for kids, that everybody has something to bring to the table, even if they don't have something that someone else they know has that they wish they had, and even if they're not, brought up in a rich family or whatever. My next movie is Jurassic Park. Nobody should be surprised that this movie's on the list. I love Jurassic Park. I like, of course, the book more than the film to a degree, although a lot of Jurassic Park for me is the aesthetics. Again, it's an atmosphere thing. I get wrapped up in that world. It's about how real the dinosaurs look and how well it still holds up. It's about the awe and the wonder in that film. Roger Ebert in his review complained that there wasn't enough of a sense of awe and wonder from the human's perspective at the spectacle of the dinosaurs and the fact that these things have been brought back to life after 65 million years. I don't know what he's talking about. I saw it again the other day in the movie theater for the first time. That awe and wonder is absolutely there, and I don't think it's lip service, and I don't think it's just in a couple places. All the way through the movie, I feel like I am living in a world where dinosaurs are real again, and isn't that crazy, and this is not supposed to be possible, and I think he's wrong. I think that awe and wonder, with respect to a man who has passed away and rest in peace, I think that awe and wonder is absolutely there. I love it for Ian Malcolm, of course. I wish he was more present in the third act. He kind of... That's a thing that I hadn't really thought a lot about, that I picked up on this viewing, where I was like, oh, he's just kind of gone toward the end. And he doesn't get any of that speechifying that he has to do in the book, which would have maybe been redundant, but he also gets attacked by raptors and get some stuff to do in the book while he's laid up. And spoiler alert, he dies in the book. So I mean, if he had had that scene, it would have had to have been different if the movie wanted him to stay alive. But I mean, I love that movie for score. I love that movie for aesthetic. Like I said, it's got my favorite cars. My favorite movie vehicles of all time. I cannot get past at this point the Jurassic Park Explorer. I want one so bad. I've been talking about this for a while. I'm gonna make this happen. I'm gonna get one. I'm gonna get it either painted or there's a cover thing you can get that looks like that and is nigh perfect. I really want to make that happen at some point. But also just Velociraptors. Jurassic Park created my love for Velociraptors. I've always considered myself more of a Velociraptor fan than a Jurassic Park fan. Don't ask me what that is. Just something about that creature and the just like the smile and like the kind of creepiness about it, where like Velociraptors are both cute and horrifying at the same time, and I love that. I want one. I wish they were real. I don't actually wish they were real because they would kill me, but it would be the best way to go. I love Velociraptors so much. And what's really funny is, I say I love Velociraptors more than Jurassic Park. I love Velociraptors because of Jurassic Park, and I guess the ones in Jurassic Park, because they kind of created that look. Like, that's not exactly what a Velociraptor looks like, and there is I've talked about this before probably, there is a dinosaur that actually looks more like what Jurassic Park called a Velociraptor, and what now, because that's so popular, the culture thinks of when they think of Velociraptor. Like, you're kind of thinking of a movie creature that doesn't really exist when you think of Velociraptor, but the Utah Raptor, which, yes, roamed around Utah, is actually closer to what the Velociraptor looks like. It's closer in size. The real Velociraptor was smaller. The Utah Raptor is a little bit bigger, and I think at this point, we know that Velociraptors had feathers, and the Utah Raptor did not. And the Utah Raptor actually does look more like a Velociraptor. Who knows what the coloration would be like, but whatever. Anyway, they look smart. They just look like there's so much going on behind their eyes, and they look like really sadistic. Like, they not only hunt, but they hunt like for sport, and maybe not really, but they just look like they really enjoy what they're doing. I can't get enough of Velociraptor. I love Velociraptor so much. My favorite image in that movie is the Velociraptor toward the end that stands in front of a projector and has all the code on his face. It's awesome. And of course, I like what that movie is, or the kind of debate that movie has about playing God, and about whether and about like the responsibility that human beings need to have to understand the nature that they're mucking with, and hubris, and knowing like having a sense of your place in the universe, that nature is bigger than you are, and you are a part of it as opposed to master of it, and all of that. It could have been maybe a little bit more at the fore, but I'm glad we get as much of that in the movie as we do. And if you think Jurassic Park is preachy about that, read the book, because it's a lot preachier. But anyway, I got issues with the end of that movie, because there's stuff that happens in the book that really should have been in that movie. It kind of ends too quickly. And there's also this exposition. I noticed this time too. Now I'm just reviewing Jurassic Park. There's this exposition that Sam Jackson has in that movie that's throwaway, that you blink, you miss it. And spoiler alert, of course, he dies. And it's like they put him in one more scene so he can get that exposition out really, really fast before he dies. And it's the thing that you get in the book about the lysine withdrawal, where there's this substance that is naturally created in the dinosaurs would be naturally creating, that their genetic engineering denies them, so that if they ever get off the island, they'll all die. So that, they can't hurt anybody, nobody finds out about them, so that InGen's not liable. And the lysine is fed to them, is given to them by the scientists. So, and I don't know how exactly that works, because it looks like the meat eaters anyway are eating like animals, so I don't know how the lysine gets to them, but anyway, they're all given lysine so that they can survive. And if they get off the island, they won't have lysine anymore, and they'll die. And that's in the book, and it's talked about in other movies, and I've talked about this on the channel where I was wondering where that was in Jurassic Park, because once they abandon the park, what's to stop all the dinosaurs from getting off the island? And in the sequel, you just have dinosaurs at Site B, where they were being made there and then brought over to the island, which feels like a retcon, because it feels like they were all being born on the Isla Sorna or Isla Nublar in the first place, and then you add this other island, so you have an explanation as to how there are more dinosaurs, so that you can have a sequel. But anyway, it's just really weird that the lysine thing isn't more front and center, because that was a question I always had, and I've seen that movie like a billion times, and finally I noticed that there is exposition about it, but I had to read the book before I even understood what in the world he was talking about. But then what's weird about it is, he's like, well, we could, instead of shutting down the whole park, we could do the lysine thing. Like there's a protocol, like the lysine protocol. What exactly would that be? It's not like a button you press that kills all the dinosaurs. If you like keep them from the lysine right now, you're all going to have to wait around on the island for like 3 weeks before they all die. I don't understand what he's talking about in that scene. But I digress. I have now talked about Jurassic Park for way too long. Let's move on now to my number 5, which is Back to the Future. Another movie that, and made by some of the same people, of course, that, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, should not exist in the form that it does, and is amazing that it, A, came together, and B, that it worked. You've got a movie about a kid that goes back in time and his mom falls in love with him, and it's going to be a huge family affair that everybody watches. That's crazy, just that even worked. Back to the Future is one of the only time travel things I really, really like. I like how tongue-in-cheek it is about it. I like that time travel is kind of treated as a conceit. There's a lot of people that say that Back to the Future does time travel one of the smartest and best ways, and I guess that's kind of true, but there are still holes, and there are, especially when you get to the sequels. But in the first movie, there's, silly things like, does it really make sense that a thing that is maybe about to happen in the past is sort of affecting the future, so that a person is beginning to dissolve? Like, that's all just visual for the sake, for the audience, and to create some tension in the scene. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like you would think that everything would happen simultaneously. It ends up being that Legends of Tomorrow thing, where it's like time takes time to happen, whatever that means. So if you think about the time travel too hard, it hurts your brain, and it ultimately, at the end of the day, is a conceit. But it's nice that the movie kind of knows that, and for the most part is still it sticks pretty well to the rules that it sets up. Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox have some of the best on-screen, friend chemistry I've ever seen in anything. Michael J. Fox being almost kind of the straight man to the wild and zany mad scientist makes Doc Brown more endearing and more likable. And of course, he gets a real character arc in 3 and feels more drawn and like a real person. But and I guess he still has that in the first movie to some degree too, where I like that there's an argument between them toward the end, where Michael J. Fox is, Marty is trying to save the Doc, and the Doc, no matter what was going to happen to him later in the present, is willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of not creating a paradox that would destroy the universe. So it's not just the novelty of the time travel and how fun it is to just see a DeLorean as a time machine, and some of the admittedly really repeatable lines and stuff that makes me love that movie so much. There is a lot of heart to that. There is a real relationship there, and a great character arc for Marty. But Doc is a cartoon character and simultaneously a likable sort of real person, which is really impressive, and a lot of that is in Christopher Lloyd's performance. But like I said, the best thing about it is just that it shouldn't work. Like, on paper, that is a horrible idea, and it should not work, and it's absolutely fantastic. The other thing I love Back to the Future for so much, particularly that first movie, is just its attention to detail, all the world building, all the little pieces. It's so thoughtful in what it puts on screen, all the setup and payoff, all the little things that you could easily miss at the beginning, that pay off at the end, that you might need multiple viewings to see, like the Twin Pine Mall that becomes the Lone Pine Mall because Marty hits a tree at the beginning of the movie, and then that changes the timeline. Man, it's just fantastic. And yeah, I get a little bit sick of all of the repeated dialogue that like people are constantly quoting that movie, and I get a little sick of it. It was kind of annoying that the IDW comics leaned so hard on all the dialogue and motifs that you remember from that movie instead of really just pushing forward and telling stories. But that's a testament to how great that script is, that we just can't stop quoting it. And yeah, it's great. So, like, nobody's going to be surprised that movie's on this list, but I can't help it. It is. My number 4 is Field of Dreams. I don't know if Field of Dreams would be number 4 on anybody's favorite movie list, and I'm not saying that it is a brilliant movie. I'm not saying that I even totally agree with the ending or totally know what's going on with the ending, but it was a major part of my childhood. I am a sucker for father-son stories. I cannot stop watching it. I watch Field of Dreams once every year, at least, and I don't even know what to say about it. It's another one of those things that kind of wins me over. I'm not a big baseball person. Growing up, I wasn't big into baseball either. But for the time that I'm watching that movie, Kevin Costner's Ray makes me love baseball. Like, I find myself caring about and relating so much to this guy that I kind of forget my own interests and sensibilities, and I get sucked into his. And suddenly I'm a baseball fan for the hour and 45 minutes that I'm watching that movie. It is the reason I love James Earl Jones. I think it's his best performance. It's a nice, intense performance, but it's also a really comedic performance. He and, I was talking about friendship chemistry. He and Kevin Costner also have brilliant friendship chemistry. One of the smartest choices in that movie was to keep him through the rest of the film. Once he comes in, he easily could have been like a cameo or a side character. And I think sometimes maybe he's even thought of that way, like he is in The Sandlot, but in this movie, he's a major supporting character who just doesn't show up until halfway through the film. There's a lot of funny quotable stuff in that movie as well. It's got a really good soundtrack. Of course, if you build it, he will come permeated really hard because it's just a really memorable thing. It's a nice conceit. I like that we don't have to create like a whole mythology around what's actually going on with that. Again, my big beef with the ending is it's pretty clear that something supernatural is happening, and I don't know why Ray gets singled out by the universe or God or whatever to have this very supernatural thing happen so that he can live happily ever after at the end, when the whole thing was really about just reuniting him with his dead father. But anyway, it's a wonderful film. I can't stop watching it. My wife doesn't like it. I don't know why. It's one of the biggest points of contention between us. My number 3 is Wrath of Khan. Nobody should be surprised that there's a Star Trek movie on this list. That needed to happen as long as there was a good enough Star Trek movie to put on it. I didn't really fight very hard to decide which one was going to go here, and if there wasn't one I liked enough as my other 19, I wasn't going to go for a Star Trek movie. But yeah, Wrath of Khan is just that good. It's the obvious thing to do. It doesn't matter. It's one of those things that is obvious because it's just that good. Wrath of Khan is one of those movies that penetrates the culture regardless of the fact that it's Star Trek. Like people watch and love Star Trek or Wrath of Khan regardless of whether or not they like Star Trek. It's one of the better science fiction movies that there is, I think. I love all of the thematic stuff about mortality and getting older, and about it also has a big playing God idea with creating life at the same time, like being paralleled with genetic engineering. Khan is, of course, a brilliant villain and a great foil for Kirk, and it doesn't matter if you've seen Space Seed, it's very watchable without that, and there's almost this kind of like nice air of mystery to that character if you've not seen Space Seed. Like, it's kind of fun to watch them back to back, but I think Wrath of Khan is such a good standalone movie. If you've not seen Space Seed, I'd almost tell you to watch Wrath of Khan first and not watch Space Seed first, which is kind of impressive as sort of a follow-up. everything about how great Wrath of Khan is has, of course, been said. Spoiler alert: Spock dies in that movie. Spock's death, while I'm not still entirely sure that I buy needed to happen in that scene. I think he might have had time to put on a suit. I'm still not sure about that. But yeah, it's heartbreaking and it's poignant, regardless of the fact that Search for Spock, we're going to go back and get him. But just looking at Wrath of Khan as a piece, he is... That scene, of course, is really super touching. It's the scene with him dying and him and Kirk, their conversation. I have and always shall be your friend, is one of the scenes, one of the great Hollywood scenes. Like I think it sticks with everybody. I think anybody that's seen that movie remembers that scene, and most of us can quote it. And it's really poignant. I love how that factors into the themes of the movie and the importance of living well, as opposed to just being alive and that kind of thing. It's wonderful. It's a super tight film, and it's also, at the time, it was even better because of the contrast to Motion Picture, which was a movie that a lot of people didn't like and was kind of boring. And so, like, it is a great film. It was the greatest movie ever made when you saw it 3 years after Motion Picture. So those of you who know me pretty well, can you guess what my top 2 movies are? Number 2 is Batman Begins. It would have been crazy to not have a major superhero movie on this list. And like I said, The Mask almost made it, but even if it had, to not have any Batman movies, and I should say, this is my top 20 apart from Batman 89. I didn't know where to list that. I didn't want to put 2 Batman movies in my top 20, and I didn't want to leave Batman Begins out because it's such an important thing for me and so foundational. And also, I've always talked about how I think Begins and Dark Knight are like right on par as far as quality of films, and when I did my top 10 of the decade all those years ago, back in 2010, for the previous decade, I cheated and had Begins and Dark Knight at the first spot. But I've always said Batman Begins is my favorite superhero movie, and it remains so. Is it the best superhero movie? Is it the best movie for characterization, for thematic ideas, for poignant notions? No. I think Logan is possibly at that place now. I think Winter Soldier tops it, or at least is on par with it for that stuff. But again, this is my list of favorites, and Batman Begins, I've talked about ad nauseum. Most of you guys have heard me talk about this, and you probably know what I'm going to say already. But it is such a great meditation on fear and all aspects of fear. Fear as a manipulator, fear as a motivator. It's a wonderful, again, father-son story with multiple father figures that all influence the protagonist in different ways. It's a wonderfully atmospheric movie. It has one of, if not my favorite scores of all time. I listen to it frequently. I find it a really motivating score. I listen to it sometimes when I write. I'll listen to it just to kind of focus myself. Sometimes it's good for me kind of meditating music. It's a world that I just get completely wrapped up in every time I see it. And again, Dark Knight might be technically the better movie, or at least it's as good as it, but it's always going to be Batman Begins for me. Really hard not to put that on my list and not put it really close to the top. So my number 1 is a movie that I put at this place pretty much solely because I can't stop watching it. Every year I watch this movie at least a couple of times, or at least I used to. I mean, again, I'm so busy now that sometimes I don't do things that I used to do as often, but at least once, if not twice, I still end up putting this movie in, and it's The Matrix. And The Matrix is a movie that I saw after it came out, did not get a chance to see in the theater. It's one of the few movies left on my bucket list that if it comes to a theater at some point again, I'm going to have to make sure and go. I've now seen Wrath of Khan in the theater a couple times. I've seen 89 in the theater. Now I just saw Jurassic Park finally in the theater, but I've never seen The Matrix in the movie theater, and I need to try to make that happen at some point if I can. The Matrix is another kind of important, foundational movie for me. It's a big deal for my chemical makeup, I guess. I was already big into science fiction at that point, but The Matrix helped to really cement that. Like for a lot of people, especially kids that saw that, because I saw that movie in high school, it was a mind blower for me. I'd never thought about a lot of the ideas and philosophical notions that come up in that movie. Whether or not you think that some of the stuff it has to say about philosophy is, about the nature of choice, about free will versus predestination. That kind of stuff is maybe a little bit oversimplified, and some people think that it's even a little bit pretentious about that stuff. It was my introduction to some of those ideas, and so it continues to matter to me a lot because of that. It helped me to kind of broaden my mind and free my mind and think about things I had never really thought about before. It was a real dark and edgy movie at the time for me. I'd not gotten to see a lot of things like that, so it felt like a movie that was kind of pushing envelopes and that maybe I was a little bit too young for. I wasn't supposed to see yet, so I was excited about it for on that level. And it was just visually like nothing else I had ever seen before. So I enjoyed it because of the kind of mind-blowing idea of living in a world, and I guess Men in Black to a much smaller degree had this too. These are ideas I'd thought of before, but brought it way to the forefront. The idea of the universe being bigger than you thought it was, and you being a much smaller part of it than you thought it was, than you thought you were. It's kind of a liberating, I should say, experience. Watching a movie about a guy who realizes how small he is and then discovers that he is the most important thing there is. It is a real traditional hero's journey story in a way. The guy who leaves his home for self-discovery and then has to return to it and bring something back to it. It absolutely is kind of the Odysseus thing, except eventually he's going to tear the whole world down. I was, of course, familiar with the notion of AI and the kind of scary ideas that we had with movies like The Terminator about our destroying ourselves by creating an intelligence that doesn't want us around anymore, that has surpassed us and thinks it's better than we are and gets rid of us, and by playing God, we kind of destroy ourselves. Sort of a theme in a lot of these movies that it tends to resonate with me, that I jump onto a lot. And so I was kind of familiar with that, but I hadn't watched any cyberpunk or read any cyberpunk, and the rebellious ideas and the kind of idea of rampant individuality was a little bit new to me, but a thing that appealed to me a lot. And I just really liked Morpheus. That was a lot of it. I loved him as a mentor. He's like a guy I would want to hang out with, and I enjoyed the morality play of it. I liked that it wasn't concerned with realism, and that its characters were that its characters were kind of archetypes and not really fully formed characters so much as stand-ins for ideas. They kind of have one prevailing character trait, and yet they're complex enough that I cared about what happened to them to some degree, but they're simple enough that it's easy to put yourself, especially in Neo's shoes, and it seemed self-aware about that. It seemed like that was just the kind of story it was telling. It wasn't pretending like its characters were any more complex or three-dimensional than they actually were. And obviously, it's just a special effects marvel. It's funny because of all the movies on this list, it's one of those that doesn't hold up as well as some others, because we've perfected some of the technology that it started. And again, I didn't put it on the list just because it's important and because it was pioneering. But I think it's a testament to the film that the ways in which it doesn't hold up as much still don't stop me from wanting to sit down and watch it. I just always, always puts me back where I was in my life when I saw it the first time. Like I said, a couple times a year, if I can, I sit down and watch The Matrix. And I tend to watch the entire trilogy, even though it's not a good trilogy. Matrix Reloaded is kind of a guilty pleasure for me. It's not a good movie, but I really enjoy watching it. And then Revolutions is just guilty of many sins, and I wish didn't exist, and does not end the way it clearly was obviously building toward, but maybe someday I'll have an avenue to talk about that. So, The Matrix I am calling my favorite movie of all time. It's hard to say that for sure, but something had to get the #1 spot, and that's what I'm saying it is, although I think any of the top 5 especially easily could have gotten that spot. Let's very briefly, and I won't talk about these at length, at anything like the length I did the other movies, and I didn't mean for this movie to be this, I didn't mean for this video, pardon me, to be this long, but I also can't say that I'm that surprised that it turned out that way. Let me just go down a list of some runner-ups, things that were on this list at one time that I had to pull off to get it down to 20. It's a Wonderful Life, which is a movie I didn't grow up with, but reviewed, was it last year or the year before, and I was surprised by how much I loved it, and it was nothing like the experience I thought it would be. It's a fascinating character study, and is one of those things that was just always so obligatory. I assumed it would just be like a fluffy, feel-good kind of nothing movie. It's not that at all, and if you've never seen it, I really recommend it. Stranger Than Fiction, because Will Ferrell's an actor that I never really cared for before that, and then sort of like with The Truman Show, this could have easily taken The Truman Show's spot. He does a still somewhat comedic but dramatic turn that really resonated with me, and it's a movie about writing and about the blurred lines of reality, again, because I love that theme, between a creator and her creation, and it's wonderful. I haven't seen that in a long time. I should go back to it. The Odd Couple, one of my favorite comedies now, which I had not watched until the Netflix roulette that Eric and I did, and it's hysterical. It's and really heartfelt. The original Odd Couple. Then you've got Whiplash, which is one of the most visceral and intense experiences I've ever had with a movie. I wish I'd seen it in the theater. I didn't watch it until a review that Eric and I did. Or did I review that on my own? No, I think he and I talked about it together. I forget. Anyway, several months ago. It only didn't make the list because I've only seen it once and I want to spend more time with it, but I bet if I did this list in 5 years, it would be there. It is absolutely brilliant. Just what that movie has to say about self-determination and like doing whatever you have to do. Again, kind of like other things we talked about earlier. No matter like The Founder. What social sacrifices you have to make. I don't think it's a movie necessarily advocating for it. It's just about a guy who feels that way, and just seeing the purest form of that philosophy put on screen was both refreshing and horrifying in its way, and I really need to go back and see that movie again. And then you have The Karate Kid, which is a movie that I saw a little when I was a kid, but not, I don't know if I ever even saw it all the way through, and I watched it again finally, I guess a couple of years ago, and then I went through the whole trilogy, and now I'm watching Cobra Kai, and I love Cobra Kai, and The Karate Kid is a wonderful, again, feel-good movie, and it's got some good lessons for kids, and Mr. Miyagi is one of the great mentor characters of all time. Then you got Lethal Weapon, which was a movie that I had seen when I was younger, but didn't remember that well, and it's Eric's favorite movie, and he's starting to make me love that franchise the more I have been watching those. Kind of the best buddy cop duo, in my opinion, of movies I've seen anyway. The Lego Movie, for all the reasons that I've talked about before, it is, I think, the best kids movie made in 10 years, at least. It's all about imaginative play and individuality and being yourself and using corporate products in your own way to make them your own. And what is art, honestly, if it's not that? Is it taking what is there already and making it your own? And then I didn't put anything Pixar on here. If I had, it would have been Monsters Inc. or Monsters University. I couldn't choose between them. If I did that, that would have been really difficult, but I love those movies equally. Terminator 2, it was kind of hard to see that and RoboCop on the list at the same time. They are not, of course, the same movie, but idea-wise, they're about a lot of the same things. And it was really hard to put one above the other, but I finally had to. But Terminator 2, of course, is a brilliant What Makes a Man story, and just another one of those movies that's impressive because it shouldn't work. That you take the Terminator and you make him a good guy. It shouldn't work, but it does, and it's wonderful. Demolition Man is a movie that I love a lot. It's a great satire. About a future where we've become so pacifistic that we don't hardly know how to think for ourselves. And I watched that again the other day and forgot how much I loved it. And then Watchmen. I know there are a lot of people who don't like the film adaptation of Watchmen, but I still think that it's absolutely wonderful and watch it at least once a year if I can. So now I'm going to go, like I said earlier, now a million years ago, down a few categories of movies that didn't make the list and what movie I would have picked had I done this category-wise. I didn't pick a documentary. I went for all fictional films, but if I picked a documentary, it probably would be Life Itself, about the life of Roger Ebert. If I had to pick a Western, it would be High Noon. If I had to pick a noir film, this is probably the obvious choice, but The Maltese Falcon, which is just brilliant. A slasher movie, I said Child's Play 2, maybe it would be Halloween, I don't know. If I had to pick a concert movie, it would be Metallica Through the Never. If I had to pick a romance, it would be Dirty Dancing. Don't make fun of me, it's a good movie. I never used to care about that movie, and my wife finally made me sit down and watch it, and I was like, oh, this isn't bad. And then I saw it in the theater with her, and I liked it even more. And, of course, if I had to pick a bad movie that I love anyway, is Jurassic House. Those of you that have watched a lot of the channel know what I'm talking about. It's Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I don't want to call it that. It's Jurassic House. That's that movie. It's Jurassic House. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed my long-winded list of my 20 favorite movies and then some. Leave your comments. Tell me what you think of my picks, and feel free to list some of your favorite movies and things maybe you're surprised I didn't say that you might have thought I would say, and I might find myself being surprised that I didn't bring certain things up either. Once again, thanks to Azim and everybody who helped us hit the goal for last week to make this video. I'll see you again next week with a new episode of the Captain Logan Show on Wednesday night at 7 Central, and also more reviews and stuff. Once again, hope you enjoyed it. I'm Captain Logan, and I'll see you again next time.